All right, so have you ever been there, like, right on the edge of doing something you want to do?
Like finally starting that project you've been putting off.
Exactly. You know, you should do it, but that little voice in your head's like, not today.
It's like our brains are hardwired to resist anything that feels even a little bit scary or uncertain.
Totally, and that's what we're tackling today, head on, in our deep dive into Mel Robbins' book, The 5-Second Rule.
This book is basically a masterclass in pushing past those mental blocks and taking action.
And to help us break it all down, we've got an expert in all things self-help.
It's great to be here, ready to dig into this 5-second rule.
So the core idea is deceptively simple, right? When you feel that hesitation, that urge to chicken out, you just count down from 5 to 1.
And then
you just go for it. No overthinking, no second guessing, just action.
it sounds almost too easy, but there's actually some fascinating neuroscience behind it.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the science behind this 5-second magic?
Well, Mel Robbins talks about how our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for decision-making and planning, gets hijacked by our more primitive, fear-driven parts.
So it's like our brain is hitting the brakes even when we consciously want to accelerate.
Exactly. And the 5-second rule acts as this pattern interrupt, sort of like a circuit breaker.
You're basically short-circuiting your fear.
Exactly. You're giving your prefrontal cortex a chance to regain control before fear takes over.
So you're not actually eliminating fear, you're just outsmarted it.
Right. It's about taking action before fear has a chance to paralyze you.
Okay, so that's the mechanics of it, but how does this translate into everyday life?
Well, Mel Robbins talks about the 5-second rule as a tool for cultivating everyday courage.
Not just for those big life-altering decisions, but for all those small moments of hesitation we experience throughout the day.
Like getting out of bed on a cold morning, speaking up in a meeting, or finally making that doctor's appointment you've been putting off.
It's those little things that can really add up.
Absolutely. Each time you use the 5-second rule, you're building that courage muscle.
You're basically training yourself to become more action-oriented.
Precisely. And the book is packed with stories of people using the 5-second rule to make incredible changes in their lives.
It's pretty inspiring stuff, from starting businesses to overcoming phobias. It seems like this rule can apply to almost anything.
One story that really struck me was about a woman who used the 5-second rule to finally quit a job she hated.
Oh, that's so relatable. So many people stay stuck in jobs that make them miserable.
Right, and for years this woman had been dreaming of starting her own business, but fear was holding her back.
Until one day she just decided to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 herself into action.
Exactly. She gave her notice, took the leap, and never looked back.
It's amazing how a simple countdown can give you that extra push you need to overcome inertia.
It's about breaking free from that paralysis by analysis and just taking that first step.
But what about when we're facing those things that are genuinely scary, like a phobia or a deeply ingrained fear?
Mel Robbins tackles this head-on in the book, sharing her own experience with the fear of flying.
Fear of flying. Oh man, that's a tough one. I know so many people who struggle with that.
Well, she developed this technique called anchoring thoughts.
Anchoring thoughts. What's that all about?
It's about using that 5-second countdown to shift your focus from the fear to a positive thought.
So instead of fixating on the what-ifs and the worst-case scenarios,
you anchor your mind to something positive and empowering.
like the excitement of reaching your destination or reuniting with loved ones?
Precisely. It's about giving your brain a different story to focus on.
So you're basically rewiring your fear response by giving it a new, more positive association.
It's like training your brain to respond to those scary situations with a sense of anticipation rather than dread.
This is also insightful. It's like you're giving us the tools to reprogram our brains for courage.
In a way, yes. We have more control over our thoughts and feelings than we realize.
And the 5-second rule is that little nudge we sometimes need to tap into that power.
It's about taking charge of your mind and directing it towards the outcomes you desire.
This is all so empowering. It's like Mel Robbins is giving us a cheat code for a braver and more fulfilling life.
It's not a magic bullet, of course.
But it's a powerful tool,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's about consistently pushing past those mental barriers and taking action 1 5-second countdown at a time.
This has been awesome, but before we go any further, we got to take a quick break.
We'll be back soon with more insights from the 5-second rule.
So don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the 5-second rule.
You know, it's funny because we were talking during the break about how
we both kind of use the 5-second rule without even realizing it.
yeah, like it's not just this abstract concept in a book, it's something that actually works in real life.
Totally. And one of the things that Mel Robbins does so well is explain the why behind it.
Yeah, like it's not just motivational fluff, there's actual science backing it up.
Exactly. She talks about this part of our brain called the amygdala.
Oh, the amygdala, that's the one that's always on high alert, right? Like our built-in alarm system.
Exactly. It's responsible for our fight or flight response, and it's constantly scanning for threats.
But the problem is, in today's world, our amygdala gets triggered by all sorts of things that aren't actually life-threatening.
Like a traffic jam or a stressful email.
Right, it's like our brain hasn't quite caught up to the fact that we're not running from saber-toothed tigers anymore.
And when that amygdala gets triggered, it basically hijacks our rational thinking.
It's like our brain throws a tantrum and floods our body with stress hormones.
And that makes it almost impossible to think clearly or make good decisions.
So we're basically fighting against our own biology when we're trying to be brave and take action.
Exactly, and that's where the 5-second rule comes in. It gives us a way to interrupt that amygdala hijack.
It's like hitting the pause button on that fear response before it spirals out of control.
And what's amazing is that every time we do this, we're actually rewiring our brains.
Wait, hold on. We can actually change our brains, like physically rewire them?
That's right, it's called neuroplasticity, and it basically means that our brains are constantly adapting and changing based on our experiences.
So the more we use the 5-second rule, the stronger those neural pathways for courage and action become.
Exactly. It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
I love that analogy. It makes this whole concept of personal growth feel so much more tangible.
And it's empowering to know that we have the ability to shape our own brains.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the amygdala and how the 5-second rule can help us interrupt that fear response. But what about when it comes to dealing with everyday anxiety?
Mel Robbins has some great tips for that too. And one of my favorites is the idea of reframing anxiety as excitement.
Reframing anxiety as excitement. That sounds a little counterintuitive.
It might seem strange, but the physical sensations of anxiety and excitement are actually very similar.
Really? So like your heart racing, your palms sweating, those could be signs of either fear or excitement.
Exactly. It's all about how we interpret those sensations.
So instead of thinking, oh no, I'm freaking out,
You can choose to think, wow, I'm so pumped for this.
I guess it's like that feeling you get before you go on a roller coaster, like a mix of nervousness and anticipation.
Exactly. And it's not just about positive thinking. It's actually backed by science.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
Well, our bodies release similar hormones in response to both fear and excitement, so it's really just a matter of shifting our perspective.
So it's like tricking our brains into thinking we're excited instead of scared.
In a way, yes. And it can have a powerful effect on our emotional state.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that next time I'm feeling anxious about something.
It's a game changer. And Mel Robbins also talks about the importance of using our physical body to shift our mental state.
Like how exercise can boost our mood.
Exactly. She emphasizes the power of movement, especially when we're feeling stuck or overwhelmed.
So while I'm taking a walk, doing some yoga, or even just dancing around the living room.
Exactly. It gets those endorphins flowing and helps clear our heads.
I've definitely noticed that when I'm feeling stressed, a good workout can really help.
It's like hitting the reset button on our emotions.
So we've covered a lot of ground here: the amygdala, reframing anxiety, the power of movement. It's amazing how many tools we have at our disposal to manage our minds.
And the 5-second rule is like the key that unlocks all these other techniques.
It's the catalyst for action, for pushing past those mental blocks and creating the life we want.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges we all face: technology.
Oh, technology, that double-edged sword.
It's amazing how much it's changed our lives, but it can also be incredibly distracting and overwhelming.
Totally. I feel like I'm constantly battling the urge to check my phone, like it's this magnetic force pulling me in.
It's like we've become addicted to distraction.
And it's not just social media, it's emails, news alerts, all these things vying for our attention.
It's like our brains are being bombarded with information overload.
And it's exhausting. It's no wonder we feel so scattered and unfocused sometimes.
Mel Robbins talks about this in the book. She calls it digital dementia.
Digital dementia. That sounds scary.
It basically refers to the decline in cognitive function that can result from excessive technology use.
So like our brains are literally getting fried from all the screen time.
In a way, yes. And it's not just about the amount of time we spend on devices, it's also about the way we use them.
Like mindlessly scrolling through social media or constantly checking for notifications.
Exactly. Those habits can actually rewire our brains to crave distraction.
It's like we're training ourselves to be more reactive and less focused.
And that can have a huge impact on our productivity, our creativity, and even our relationships.
It's like we're sacrificing our present moment for the constant stimulation of the digital world.
And we're missing out on so much.
The good news is Mel Robbins offers some practical strategies for breaking free from this digital addiction.
One of the simplest but most effective is to create some distance between ourselves and our devices.
Like putting your phone in another room or turning off notifications.
Exactly. It's about creating those physical and mental barriers that make it harder to give in to those impulses.
I've tried that before, and it really does help. It's amazing how much calmer I feel when I'm not constantly bombarded with notifications.
It's like giving your brain a chance to breathe.
And she also talks about being more intentional with our technology use,
Like setting specific times for checking email or social media.
instead of letting it take over our entire day.
Right, it's about being the master of our technology and not the slave to it.
I love that. It's about reclaiming our time and attention and using it for things that truly matter.
It's about living a more present and fulfilling life, both online and offline.
So we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today: fear, anxiety, technology addiction. But I think it's important to remember that we're not alone in these struggles.
We all have those moments of self-doubt, those times when we feel overwhelmed or stuck.
And the 5-second rule is a reminder that we have the power to choose how we respond to those challenges.
It's a tool for taking back control, for pushing past our fears, and for creating a life that aligns with our values.
It's a reminder that even small acts of courage can have a ripple effect, not just in our own lives, but in the world around us.
And that's what makes this book so inspiring. It's not just about personal growth, it's about using that growth to make a positive impact.
It's about creating a world where we all feel empowered to live our best lives.
And that's something worth fighting for, one 5-second decision at a time. All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the 5-second rule.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more thing I want to dig into: procrastination.
Procrastination, the ultimate productivity killer.
We all do it to some extent, right? But Mel Robbins really gets to the root of why we procrastinate.
It's not just laziness, it's often driven by deeper emotional factors.
Like fear of failure or feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. Procrastination is a way of avoiding those uncomfortable feelings.
It's like our brains are trying to protect us, but it ends up backfiring.
Totally, because in the long run, procrastination just creates more stress and anxiety.
So how does the 5-second rule help us break this cycle?
Well, Mel Robbins argues that by taking action before those negative emotions take hold, we can interrupt the procrastination pattern.
It's like we're short-circuiting that urge to put things off.
Precisely. We're taking control before those feelings of overwhelm or fear can paralyze us.
Makes sense. It's kind of like that saying, eat the frog first.
I love that analogy.
Tackle the hardest task first, and the rest of the day feels easier.
Exactly. And the book gives some great strategies for putting this into practice.
Like creating a starting ritual.
Right. So instead of getting bogged down by the enormity of a task,
You just count down from 5 and take one small step.
it doesn't have to be anything major, just something to get the ball rolling.
It's like tricking your brain into getting started.
And once you've taken that first step, it's much easier to keep going.
Momentum, baby.
Exactly. And each small win builds your confidence and makes it easier to tackle the next challenge.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Totally. You start believing in your ability to get things done.
But what about those times when we do slip up and procrastinate?
Mel Robbins emphasizes the importance of self-forgiveness.
Yeah, it's easy to beat ourselves up when we don't live up to our own expectations.
But she reminds us that we're human and we're all going to make mistakes.
It's not about being perfect, it's about progress, right?
Exactly. And that self-compassion can actually be more motivating than self-criticism.
Because it allows us to approach our goals from a place of kindness and understanding.
It's about giving ourselves the space to learn and grow without judgment.
Speaking of growth, there's one concept in the book that I found really intriguing: the idea of productive procrastination.
Ah, yes, the idea that procrastination isn't always a bad thing.
Wait, are you seriously telling me there's a good kind of procrastination?
There can be. Mel Robbins distinguishes between destructive procrastination, which is what we typically think of.
Like avoiding tasks to the point where it causes stress and anxiety?
Exactly. But she also talks about productive procrastination, which can actually be beneficial, especially for creative work.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How can procrastination be productive?
Well, sometimes when we step away from a problem, let our minds wander.
We're actually giving our subconscious a chance to work on it in the background.
Exactly. It's like taking a break allows those aha moments to bubble up.
So it's not really procrastination, it's more like incubation.
I like that.
It's giving your brain the space it needs to make those creative connections.
Precisely. And the key is to trust that process, even if it feels like you're not making progress.
That's tough though, because sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between productive procrastination and just plain old laziness.
It's a fine line for sure, but I think it comes down to being honest with yourself about why you're procrastinating.
Like, are you avoiding the task because it's genuinely overwhelming, or because you're just not in the mood?
Exactly. And it's also about paying attention to how you feel. If you're feeling guilty and anxious, it's probably not productive.
But if you're feeling relaxed and open to new ideas, it might just be what your brain needs.
And sometimes, a little bit of downtime can actually make us more productive in the long run.
So to wrap things up, I think one of the biggest takeaways from the 5-second rule is that we have more power than we realize.
It's about recognizing those moments of hesitation and using that 5-second window to choose courage over fear.
To choose action over inaction.
To choose to create the life we want rather than letting life happen to us.
It's about pushing past those limiting beliefs and taking those small steps that can lead to big changes.
And it's about being kind to ourselves along the way, recognizing that setbacks are a natural part of the journey.
So what are you going to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 yourself into doing today?
We'd love to hear your stories, your challenges, your triumphs.
Let's keep this conversation going and inspire each other to live more courageous and fulfilling lives.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.